Johnson, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. You've had a really wonderful career working on such a range of films. When were you first brought on to Jurassic Park 3, and how did that sort of come about?
It came about for me. I came on, I guess it would have been probably about 3 months prior to the start of shooting. And I was working for DreamWorks and Amblin on a TV series that I had shot the pilot for and was shooting all of the episodes, called The Others. And that show was sort of like an anthology show about a group of psychics. And, each episode was, about this group of characters and how an outsider would come in and need assistance in their personal life and how they would kind of help enrich this person. And so each episode was very different. And Steven Spielberg was very involved with that, and particularly with handpicking the directors who came in. And so we had a large variety of directors, anywhere from very experienced guys like Toby Hooper and Bill Condon, to a couple of first-time guys, that came in. And so they really ran the gamut. And a lot of these people were friends of Steven. So Steven would come by the set, usually once or twice for each episode, just to check out their director and all that. And so I had almost kind of weekly kind of run-ins with him while he was doing that. When he was visiting, he wouldn't talk to me much, but he would, other than being very polite and greetings and all that, and I would usually give him my chair to sit in so he could have good view, and then he could talk to his director, and I think that maybe what he saw over time was how I was adapting quite a bit to help his directors, which is kind of rare in TV, for series TV anyway. At the time, I decided when I did the film, or when I did the series rather, that I wanted that series to be very much a director's showpiece. So I changed my game up quite a lot for each director. I would meet with the director the week prior. Every lunch break, I would meet with next week's director in a way. So we would talk about the things that they wanted to do, and I told them, well, I'll do anything you want. If you want to do something special with the look, don't worry about the continuum of the show. I'll find a way to create a through line that links all this. But I said, feel free to ask for something crazy, and I'll do my best to make your show expressive and kind of uniquely yours, and because I want the show to be identified with its directors, and which I did. So there were directors that came in. One guy wanted his very dark and warm. One guy wanted his very cool and bright. One guy wanted his skip bleach. One wanted his black and white. I mean, these directors
truly
really
all over
asked
the place,
all over the map. And my feeling was, we've got enough of a consistency going where it's the same crew, it's the same cast, it's the same DP. I mean, there's going to be intangibles that are going to automatically kind of link all these episodes. And I kind of like the idea of each episode kind of being its own little film. So I think that probably related to Steven, because I think that, for one thing, he's all for a good director DP pairing. And I think that he really likes it when a DP can really, connect with a director and help that director achieve something that wouldn't otherwise be possible if that connection wasn't there. So as we were kind of winding down that series, they were kind of slowly crewing up for another series. I was a TV cinematographer. I've been working for 15 years prior, doing nothing but movies of the weeks and pilots and all that. Not much series. This was the one series that I decided to do just because I liked it so much. And so they were kind of crewing up for this pilot they were about to do, and one by one, hiring our crew members to commit to this next pilot. As soon as we were wrapped, they were going to start, and they never talked to me about it.
Right.
They were hiring the prop guy and the art department and other, and people were coming up to me, hey, have they talked to you about this new series? And no, they haven't. So I was kind of wondering what's going on. Yeah. And they weren't tipping me off at all. They were kind of letting me kind of suffer. And we wrapped The Others, and it went great, but there was no sign of any other show from DreamWorks. So until about 2 weeks later when I got a call from Larry Franco, who's the producer of Jurassic, and said, hey, we were just in Steven's office and he showed us some footage from the show and said that we need to talk to you about doing Jurassic. And so why don't you come down and you get to meet Joe Johnston and you guys can discuss it. He said, unfortunately, we can't show you the script, but, it's Jurassic 3 and, you get the idea.
Yeah, wow. Well, I mean, to be recognized by Spielberg like that must have been incredibly amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was a unique place to be. And there are certain things that he does to help enhance a story. Is really like one story, for instance, we were, him. He loves scenes with flashlights, and
Sure.
so when he's on set visiting a director, he almost can't resist directing. And so we were doing a scene with a flashlight. One of our characters had a flashlight. She was in like this little closet and she was searching for something. And so Steven had this idea, the camera was on, one side of this box that she was searching and she was on the other side of the box. And he had this idea, well, if she ducks down and we see the beam of the flashlight come up first and then she rises. So we see kind of the flashlight almost like a lighthouse. And then we see her, which was kind of a very Spielbergian vocabulary.
Very, yeah.
And so he made that suggestion. They're like, great. And the actress, I was kind of there taking my light reading. The actress whispered to me, she said, Shelly, can you show me what he's talking about? Because I don't want to mess this up. I said, oh, yeah, sure. So I showed her how to hold the flashlight so that the camera could read the beam of light and kind of wave it around a little and then come up. And then so bring your head up after that. You know how that's supposed to look. Okay, thank you.
Oh, that's
She didn't want to mess up in front of him. Yeah, it was really funny. And so who knows? He may have seen those types of things because that's the type of thing where a DP can really help a moment, by making the actress feel comfortable and all that. And here he was asking for her to act with the light, and so some actors get that and some don't, So it was like hundreds of those little things that probably created all this. He never really told me why, but the long and short of it was it got me in front of Joe, and so there.
For sure, yeah. So I guess, could you tell us a little bit about the role of a cinematographer and especially the sort of difference between the TV work you were doing and then what that means for film?
Yeah, it is a little different. The TV series work, the job, at least in those days, was very technical. I was sort of breaking that mold by bringing a lot more of the thematic elements into the director's world. In TV, a director is he almost kind of directs the pace of the shooting and organizes the shooting, but has very little to do with the actual telling of the story. That usually falls on the writers and the actors and the producers. The directors kind of come in and out, and they're the people you see the least because they'll come in for one episode and they'll leave and you may never see them again, where the rest of the crew, the actors, the cast, the writers and all that are all there every week.
Yeah.
So of course, in the case of a feature, and particularly in a movie where you're working with Joe Johnston, the director is the boss. You're working for him. And so it's important for me to do sort of what I was doing on a miniature scale with the others, which is get in with someone like Joe, talk to him a lot about the script, talk to him about how he feels about certain scenes. Generally, what I'll do is try to get little visual cues from even conversations whose topics have nothing to do with visuals. I did another thing for DreamWorks that had a Broadway director that was the director of this project and had a lot of film experience, and they wanted me to spend time with him and quote teach him about how to move the camera, and which you can't really do. I can talk to him about it, but it's sort of kind of up to me to make that connection. And so as we were talking during prep, this Broadway director told me, hey, look, I know why you're here. I know you're supposed to talk to me about moving the camera, but he said, I have no idea how to even talk to a DP. I don't know what to say, how to tell you how to move the camera, what I want. And I said, okay, well, don't worry about that. Tell me what you do know. because
Yeah.
you don't have to know about cameras and lights. Tell me what you're going to tell the actors on this scene. Tell me what how you picture editing. Or do you have any kind of images? Do you have a still image or a silhouette in front of a window? Or tell me about what you're telling the wardrobe people, what you're going to tell the editor. Just tell me anything, and I can kind of, connect my own dots and then present something to you. And so he said something just brilliant. He said, okay. He said, one thing I can always tell you, and I can answer this question any time of the day. He said, I can always tell you what I want the audience to feel. And so I thought, okay, that's pretty much all you need. If you can tell me that much, that puts me in a position to really help you. And so, if a director can tell me what the moment is that we're trying to convey to the audience, what the audience needs to walk away with the scene, I can certainly help provide all the visual components to do that, and that can come from creating a tone on the set, creating a composition of the actors versus their surroundings, how they either meld with their surroundings or how they conflict with their surroundings. It could be a scene about character where we can really focus on a nuance in a character we're trying to introduce to the audience, or a very procedural type of scene where we're trying to connect several dots in the purpose of the scene. So there's lots of ways we can kind of break that down. So my job is to realize the director's ideas and break down all those visual components so that I can present those to the audience in a consistent and meaningful manner. This is generally what I do.
Okay.
So I'm in charge of the camera placement, lighting, the feel of the lighting. So I'll run the grip and electric crews who conduct all the lighting and camera. I'll run the camera department, and with the director, I'll collaborate with him on kind of making the shot work for the audience.
Well, I think Jurassic Park 3, that was your first major feature film. You've done some, obviously, a lot of TV work before that, and you've done a couple of TV movies, right?
Yeah, I'd done probably, 6 or 7 independent features, kind of the very beginning of my career. I actually started in features. And when those directors all moved to TV more or less at the same time and started doing movies of the week. So when they moved into TV, so did I. And so what happened was I ended up working for 15 years doing those, and I probably did 50 of them. TV movies were something that you would do, you'd probably do 4 of those a year. So we would, prep for a week or two, shoot for 4 weeks, and then move on to the next thing. And they were all very different. So one week we might be doing, a cop drama. The next month we'll be doing a comedy. The next month after that we'll be doing a western. The next month after that we'll be doing a courtroom drama.
Complete variety.
They were all complete variety. There was no consistency whatsoever. So it was sort of up to me to become a chameleon and change my game and change up, how I did things. And the more that I could show versatility and depth and the ability to be able to adapt into different genres, the more directors kind of found me, a valuable asset, particularly someone to take from picture to picture to picture. If I could show that I could do more than one thing, now I'm someone they can help build a career with. And there's a few guys that I've been able to do that with. And when I met with Joe, or was going to meet with Joe, I looked up his past relationships with cinematographers and saw that he had only worked with one person twice, and every other cinematographer he had kind of worked with once and then moved on to a different guy, then moved on to a different guy. And so I could tell he didn't really click in with a collaborator yet. He was still looking. So I felt like, okay, he's looking for someone. That's probably something Spielberg sensed as well, because here's a very visual director, a very good director. There's no reason for him to not have a good regular DP.
Yeah, sure.
He's so on top of it, and he really should have that. So, I saw that right away and decided, okay, I need to figure out, what it is that Joe needs. Well, why does he keep changing cinematographers for each movie?
Yeah, for sure. But it seemed like a prime opportunity for both of you at that point.
Yeah.
So with Jurassic 3, that was obviously following on from The Lost World. Did you use the film itself, The Lost World, and Kaminsky's work for inspiration? And what were some of the largest sort of challenges you had with lighting and shooting a big Jurassic movie.
Right. Yeah. I did. Of course, I looked at the previous two films, and actually, visually, there's a big difference between, Jurassic Park and The Lost World. When Janusz shot The Lost World, that was the first film that they shot after Schindler's List, I believe.
Yeah, I think Schindler's was their first, wasn't it? But it was...
Yeah.
There was a very different way
Schindler's
of shooting.
List.
Yeah.
Very different. Yeah. Schindler's List, which was all handheld and black and white, and just a totally emotional, journey. And then you have The Lost World, which is a completely different telling of a story, different way to tell a story. And these two stories couldn't be more opposites. I mean, and here's Janusz really doing something with it. I really admired what he did, particularly with some of his day exteriors. He got a look going by using very aggressive lighting sources and did some very, very interesting things. So I liked the tone that he was setting, and I liked the kind of the grittiness that The Lost World had. It had kind of less gloss than Jurassic Park had. Jurassic Park, I was surprised actually how bright it was.
Yeah.
And Lost World kind of explored, since they didn't have the theme park to kind of be service to, they explored more of the shadows. Yeah. And, I kind of want to do the same thing with mine. And so I did look at what Janusz did, and also a big turning point was Alan Davio, who was also a Spielberg collaborator. He did, I think, 5 movies with Steven. Called me. I knew Alan as a personal friend since I was young, and so he gave me a ring as soon as he heard this was in the pipeline. He said, "Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to come over to my house, and I'm going to show you my movie Congo." And he said, "The reason I'm going to show you this movie is because we shot a lot of jungle sets on stage, which is something you're going to be doing on Jurassic." And he said, I really want to show you what I felt worked and what I felt didn't work. I could help you. Which this, how generous is that? And so I went over to Alan's place, and he showed me the movie. And I mean, we spent hours there going over how he used light and how he used water vapor for atmosphere to help catch the beams of light, and his coloring and all that. And he would point to these small details, and over here, I could have done better over here, and I could have done better over there. And which was like, you must be kidding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, it was all beautiful and all amazing, but here he was, being so candid with me and really helping me. And I think all through my career, there's been these people that come up and do that. And they hate to see a cinematographer who's got a break like this, make a mistake. When you make a mistake on a movie like a Jurassic Park movie, you're making a mistake in front of a lot of famous people.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of, they wanted to make sure I knew what I was getting myself into. And I knew at the same time that I still had to take chances. I had to take as many risks as I did, in TV. The reason I got TV to work was because I was on the outer extremes of what was acceptable. And I kind of slowly learned what the TV medium was about. And that was sort of what it was. When opposites shared the same frame, TV became expressive. And so to take those kind of chances and be on that ragged edge, you're constantly, you're taking risks that sometimes even the producers and director don't even know you're taking. And I knew that I couldn't become relaxed about that or rein myself in, for the purpose of safety.
For sure.
I
push it at least a little bit.
Yeah, I knew I was going to be taking a seat at the high stakes table, but I still had to make the big bets, and do that.
Well, it paid off. So honestly, it paid off with Jurassic 3. It really did.
Yeah, it's not a perfect job for sure. There's a lot. If I could reshoot it today, I'd do a lot of things differently. And one of the things that came about from Jurassic 3 was it's a little brighter than I would have liked. It's the whole film in printing kind of got a little brighter because that was just the nature of it all. Everyone was more comfortable seeing things a little brighter. It was actually intended to be a slightly darker film, but certain scenes still are kind of dark. The Pteranodon Canyon sequence and all that, it still has its mood, and just a lot of things that still do. So maybe I'm being nitpicky like Alan was being nitpicky on his own work.
Well, I think the aviary sequence is my favorite sequence in the film. It's just got such a perfect atmosphere that's so fitting for Jurassic Park. It's the smoke and the mist and the darkness of it. It's perfect. But it's great hearing that you wanted Jurassic 3 to be even darker, because that's kind of, for me, that's where Jurassic goes. I like the darkness of all the movies. I think that's, it's Jurassic to me. So the franchise has some amazing set pieces, and Jurassic Park 3 is no exception. What was your favorite sequence to light and shoot in the movie?
Well, there's in terms of a sequence, it would have to be the aviary sequence was sort of a centerpiece of the film, and that was incredibly rewarding to shoot. It was immensely complicated. We did have storyboards, and Joe doesn't do VFX previs or anything like that. He draws storyboards, and usually what he'll do, his process is he'll draw some roughs that he'll show only the storyboard artist, and then he'll let the storyboard artist kind of flesh the boards out and make them real boards. And he'll draw, to him, which are little stick figures, but really his rough boards are actually really good. They're really cool. There's not a wasted line, but he'll give those. So the boards that we get, that end up getting distributed to the shooting company, are actually pretty well thought out. And this is something he does on his own. He'll rarely even include me on these. He likes that interchange between the director and the board artist. And he'll more encourage the board artist to kind of add elements, and then my job is to chime in after that process. He doesn't want me coming in too early with that. But I'll certainly observe quite a bit of what's happening and between him and the board artists. So in the case of the aviary sequence, we had boards, and that was probably the sequence where we really followed the boards the closest. In a sequence where we're doing one sequence in one place, Joe will, the first thing he'll be happy to do is throw his own boards out and respond to something that's happening on set. He's not going to stick to the boards if there's something better in front of him. So he'll do that pretty consistently, and the idea of the boards is to give you an idea of what he's thinking, but that may change when he sees all the elements come together, Sure, yeah. And in the case of the aviary sequence, we were on 3 different interior stages and 1 very large exterior set piece, and so because we were shooting the piece in so many chunks, he stuck more to the boards, because he didn't want to let one thing lead him down some primrose path and then off a cliff when he got to the next set. He wanted to, he wanted to really stick to his plan here, because it was such a complicated thing to shoot, and particularly with all the stunt work and the wires on the aerial stuff and the Pteranodons that weren't there, but the camera still had to be panning around like they were there and whatnot. The little Pteranodons were there. The puppets of the babies were there, because Stan had, they were on those kind of pinnacles. And those pinnacles were just like whatever, made out of fiberglass. And so there'd probably be 6 or 7 puppeteers squeezed into this, this pinnacle set. And with all of their operating their little rod puppets that were the babies. And then they had they did have a Pteranodon suit. So when the Pteranodon lands on the catwalk, that's actually, that's a practical Pteranodon. And so that's a man walking around. And the suit was amazing. But other than that, the rest were all going to be CG that came about later. So we had to have our camera performance. If we panned off of Sam and onto, a Pteranodon flying by, ILM wanted to see how fast that pan was going to be, where we were going to pan to. They said, it doesn't matter if you're panning over lights, just show us what the camera's going to be doing. We'll fix all that stuff. So they were very encouraging to make that sequence move and kind of have its rough edges, so it looked like the camera could kind of barely even record what was going on, and put the audience, in a place of understanding kind of the desperation of the moment. That's really important. And normally what could happen with a visual effects sequence is they can become rather antiseptic and a little too perfect, and therefore kind of lose their soul, which these did not. Joe has a very good barometer for that, and the last thing he wants is for the visual effects of it all to affect his narrative. He'd much rather engage the audience with the characters in the situation, which means having freedom to move the camera and freedom to, let things get a little rough if need be, which is what we did there. So we we plugged away at these various set pieces, and I had my lighting scheme. Of course, just in the script, there was supposed to be an enormous amount of fog. By the time they got to the bottom of the canyon, they were kind of getting below the level of the fog, and more things were starting to become visible. But the pteranodons were supposed to be quite mysterious at the beginning. You don't really know what plucks them off that catwalk until they start to see what's happening and where they are in the aviary and whatnot.
Yeah, the big misty reveal.
Yes. So my plan was to have this very kind of indirect light, filtered through the fog. And as they got deeper in the canyon, it got a little darker until they got to the bottom when there'd be no sun at all, maybe a little bit hitting the cliffs up there, but they'd be an indirect light. Eventually what happened, that kind of lighting effect we could achieve on stage, and we had complete control because we're indoors and we could do that. Our largest set piece was the set of cliffs on the river at the bottom of the canyon. That was all at Falls Lake, which is a permanent lake on the Universal backlot, kind of up halfway up the hill there. So it's kind of up this little mountain. And there it is, this huge lake. And they've got, it's a concrete lake, and they've got a permanent green screen structure on one side of it. And Ed Verreau, the designer, his plan was to attach all his cliffs to that green screen, kind of use it as a support for his cliffs. So we'd cover the green screen completely with our cliffs, and then use the lake at the base of the green screen as our river. So yeah, that was a great plan. And the only thing about it was most backlots are set up in the old days, used to set them up so that the light hit them on a south face, which means that as the sun rises, in the east and sets in the west, the sun itself is slightly biased toward the south, which means the green screen is front lit all day. So now that his cliffs were on that green screen, these cliffs were going to be front lit all day, which was diametrically opposed to everything I had done and set up and was going to set up. And we knew all this in prep. And I wasn't really happy about this layout of the cliffs with how it pertained to the sun direction. The cliffs themselves were beautiful. He had waterfalls in them and how they integrated. I mean, the detail, and they were just fabulous, but it was oriented completely 180 degrees off from what I needed for light. So this required us to diffuse that whole area. And we're talking about a 250-foot by 100-foot area. I mean, almost a football field, a large area. And it's incredibly difficult to diffuse, to disguise the sun from an area that big. Normally we might be able to do it in an area 20 by 20 feet, or in a very large installation, 60 by 60 feet. 200 by 100 is bonkers. And so we had to think of a way to deal with this. And, a lot of the people couldn't understand why I couldn't just use the sun. They didn't know what the problem was. And in order to kind of make this work, you sort of have to explain to people what the, why you're doing what you're doing and why you're asking for what you're asking for. And so I would explain to them what the whole journey through the canyon, what it all meant at the bottom, and sunlight at the bottom of the canyon didn't make any sense. And so the key grip came up with an idea to build a large scaffold around the entire lake, and which was, I think, 70 feet tall, 60 or 70 feet tall. It might have been 80 feet tall. It was quite tall, 250 feet by 100 feet. And then he had this silk material that he could then used as kind of like a temporary roof. And these things were on cables, so you could sort of pull them back in strips, and they were staggered so it relieved the wind load, because we're on this mountain, right? So, which meant all this wind came up the mountain. So we had to have this thing engineered. It was like the largest scaffold installation that was installed by the Hollywood Grips at that time, the local lady Hollywood Grips. It was their largest scaffold they'd ever built. And Larry Franco, the producer, sat me down in his office, and we still haven't started shooting yet. But I've pitched this idea, we've designed it, we've engineered it, it's on paper, they've budgeted, and it's going to be expensive. It's going to cost like $500,000 to do this. So and Larry had a very tough time reconciling his brain with this expense. And he sat me down one day, just he and I in his office, closed the door and said, okay, I'm going to have to decide on this today. I'm either going to have to pull the trigger on this thing, or I'm going to have to insist you come up with a different plan. But he said, run this past me one more time. Tell me how this is going to work. And so I ran over the whole thing just like I told you. And then I added one thing at the end. I said, Larry, if you think about this, I'm going to have essentially a stage out there with a big translucent roof. And, we're in November by this time. We're near the end of our shooting schedule by the time we got to this, so we need to start building it a couple months in advance. And so I said, by the time we get to November, the days are going to be very, very short. And, if we're out there shooting practical daylight, we may start at 7. We're going to have to wrap at 5 or 6. So you're going to be limited to, 9 shooting hours a day, 8 or 9 shooting hours a day. Plus the way a film set works, you end up starting a little later the next day because the actors have to turn around, they have to go through makeup and all that. So your days kind of get later and later and later as the week goes on, which was going to be a problem with this daylight set. So I said, one thing about this plan is because it's a big box with a translucent roof, at night I can come in with some really big lights, some Musco lights and 18Ks that I could put on the scaffold and light that at night. And so now we can shoot into the night with this rig. So, if you have whatever it is, 10 days set aside for the sequence, 10 9-hour days or whatever 8-hour days, I can probably get it done in 8 12-hour days with this rig. And so he looked at me and said, well, Shelly, if you're telling me that if I build this rig and you're going to save me 2 days of shooting, I'll sign that check right now. I said, yeah. I said, it's perfectly possible. That we can shoot into the night with this. And if I have the equipment I need, we can shoot into the night. And we did it the first day. The original plan was to get into this area, and I was going to try to shoot only tighter things at night. And something went wrong, and there was some stunt rigging going on. So we actually started the day doing tighter things, and then the stunt rigging was finally ready for them to do the drop with Alessandro and the Toronto. I was going to fly it behind him and kind of pick him up and drop him again, and that big wide shot. And that we ended up doing at night, which was like a total opposite of what I really wanted, but it still worked. And after we did that first day, they were really relieved. They could see, okay, there is this plan actually going to work. It paid off. It was expensive and big, and it would have been just a glorious failure had it failed. It would have been just in front of everybody, because by then Spielberg was visiting us and everyone could see this thing. We were up on the hill, and I mean all of the entire studio could see this rig. And so yeah, I was quite relieved when it worked. But that largely is because with the needs of what we had for the scene, and then eventually that exact cut, they did a cut into the scene that goes from our Falls Lake River to a practical river in Hawaii, just on a cut. One direction is Falls Lake, the other direction is Hawaii. So wow. I also had to think about how we're going to integrate back into Hawaii for when they get on the boat and all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So you filmed on both Kauai and Oahu in Hawaii, which must have been an amazing experience. But what were the challenges of matching that, especially with, I mean, we could talk about Stage 12, the famous jungle set.
Right. Yeah, the jungle set, at least the lighting balance and all that kind of came from Hawaii. We knew we were going to be working on the big sets on stage because it was mainly because of the Spinosaurus. He was big. He weighed 25,000 pounds, and he couldn't move. He could only move on these tracks. And the tracks were giant I-beams that were bolted into this concrete, and so because he was so heavy, and but so he was just on kind of this carriage, and I think he could move like 30 or 40 feet. That was it. And so he was limited, and he couldn't really go outdoors, and they certainly didn't want to take him on location, so they wanted to keep him on the Universal lot. And so that's the reason for Stage 12. So I was it was described to me, here's what we want to do with this. And I was excited to do it. So I started to think about, okay, what are the components to lighting on stage? And you basically have a skylight and you basically have direct sunlight. So when we went to Hawaii to scout, we're looking at the jungles in Hawaii. And so we're on Kauai near Princeville. And actually at a location where they used for part one, the big shot where they see, the Brachiosaurus is out there near the lake. This is Jurassic Park. That big moment that we were shooting at that location. We shot at some other areas that had some more dense jungles, and then some other areas on Oahu that had, the airstrip, and then we had the Manoa Valley where they run across the raptor eggs and whatnot. And so at each one of these locations, I had my color temperature meter, I had my light meter. I was taking readings from these two components, from the skylight and from the direct sunlight. And so I knew kind of the color of each, the intensity of each, the difference in exposure between the two, so I could translate all of those values into the lighting on stage. So when you're in Hawaii, the big thing that I saw right away is you're dealing with a lot of light. It's when you go to different countries, you really see that as a cinematographer. In California, we're used to a certain amount of light, a lot of light, because it's essentially a desert out here. Yeah. And so us Californians are always used to having a lot of sunlight, not a lot of influence from the skylights. We have to kind of fill our shadows and, like that. In England, when I shoot a film in England, there's easily a stop less light there. A stop is half the amount. So it's now you can shoot a lot more natural light in England. When I go to New Zealand, it's a lot like Hawaii, where there's even more light than LA. So I'm talking, and there is a value. There's more light. So the sunlight's brighter, and the sky is there, but of course it's not giving you much interaction from that blue skylight. So that's kind of the way Hawaii is. And so that you have to kind of get used to that. And if you're a cinematographer, you have to kind of adapt to these different areas. You have to kind of do the math very quickly on where you are and what it all looks like. And of course, this is all on film. Jurassic 3 was a shot on film, photochemical finish. So we did an answer print, interpositive, internegative. We didn't get to any kind of digital step until we did our transfer off the interpositive for the home delivery. Other than that, it was going to be a total photochemical finish. So all of my contrast, my coloring, everything had to be baked into how the negative was shot. So I needed to be pretty on. There wasn't going to be verification while we're shooting, on monitors and things like that. It was what I saw on the ground glass and what we'd eventually see on the film print. That was our workflow, And so I was able to kind of take these values on stage, set my lighting up so that I had that. So in terms of the sunlight and the skylight, I could create that difference in color and value. And then the next thing I had to deal with was the character of light, So when you go on stage, Joe had this really interesting piece of reference. He had kind of one piece of reference that he really liked, and it was a graphite drawing by a guy named Doug Henderson, who's a paleo artist. And it's a drawing, so it's graphite, so it's black and white. So there's not even color in it. But he loved the values. He said this is the image that most emulates what I'd love Stage 12 to look like. And it's this picture of this sort of crocodile alligator creature kind of on the mud, sitting there on his belly on the mud, and he's under this kind of decaying log that's over his head, and you're kind of looking out past him. He's in silhouette, and beyond him, maybe 100 yards beyond him, there's sort of this misty forest and some shaft of sunlight that's coming down and, dappled through the trees, these multiple shafts that go through the branches. And the fact that the creature was dark in the foreground, you could still see detail in the shadows, but he was dark and more or less silhouetted against this brighter background. He said that's what he wanted to create on Stage 12. So then it became about, okay, with these components, I have my color, I have my intensities, because I do need to match to Hawaii. I couldn't go completely theatrical in the stage 12 set as much as I would have wanted to, because so much of what we were going to do was going to directly intercut with Hawaii.
For sure.
So I needed to have a certain amount of realism in there, as much as I would have loved to have really gone completely for this Doug Henderson look. But we definitely used it. We got 75% there for sure, and the rest that Doug did was enhanced in something that just didn't exist in Hawaii.
For sure.
So yeah, one of the big components of that was the direct sunlight and the fact that all these parallel shafts were kind of coming through the trees, which is a phenomenon you get when you have the sun 90 million miles away. The light that's created from a source that far away is very straight. The beams are like bars. They're just very parallel and straight. And if they're coming through branches, you've got several. I've got dozens of them coming through, right? So, but now if you're on stage and your light is not 90 million miles away, but now 50 feet away, that light comes out as kind of a cone shape. You can picture the beam of light. It sort of fans out.
Yeah.
It doesn't come out parallel. It comes out like a fan, which means that now you're going to shoot that light through the trees. Well, the shafts that are created through the tree branches are still going to follow that fan-shaped logic. So they won't be parallel. They'll be some will be falling shallower than others, and then it'll start to fan out. And that's one of those intangible giveaways that an audience can feel more than they can see, that immediately makes a statement, okay, this is fake. That's not the sun, that's a light. And we wanted very much to not tip our hand with that. So I started thinking about, okay, multiple shafts through trees from a distant source, I started to think, well, wonder if I can make the appearance of multiple shafts with actually multiple lights, but just make all those individual lights very parallel. So in other words, if I could spot in a light with a very parallel beam, I could use an array of lights and create these multiple shafts as though it looks like the source is 90 million miles away. So I went to a company called Mole Richardson, and Mole Richardson is one of the grand old, grandfather companies of Hollywood. They've been making lights since the silent era, and it's a family-run business, and the guy running at the time was Larry Parker, and Larry Parker was Peter Mole's grandson, and so this company had just been passed down to family member to family member, and they were still going, and Larry was creating this light called a mole beam, and the light is very simple. If you can picture, it's a light bulb, and behind that light bulb is this concave mirror, and out the front of the light comes this perfect beam, and it's sort of a retooling of a very old light that they used in Hollywood. It has no lens, no nothing. It's just a mirror and a light bulb. It's almost like a flashlight in a way. And if you can picture that, and then but the beam that comes out is pure and perfect. And I was talking to him about these lights, and he said, all the engineering is in the mirror. He said they went to Bausch and Lomb and had them make the mirrors. So these mirrors are perfect. So I said, because these mirrors are so perfect, we can give you that perfect parallel beam. And so he got one out and he showed it to me. I said, oh my God, this is exactly what I need. I said, can I get 44 of these? And I had kind of this diagram. And he said, well, I can make them for you. We said, we don't have 44 of them, but when do you need them? I'll make them. And because they're manufacturers, so they made a deal with Universal, and Universal bought 44 of these from Larry. And so he made them for my diagram. I had certain sizes, and I was going to put them on these movable carriages. In the stage, I put these kind of baskets up there that could hold, I think, 11 each. And I could run these down these tracks that were in the roof of the stage and move my beams around. Because one of the things that Joe told me very early on with the stage 12 thing, he said, hey, look, just so you know, Shelly, if I'm going to have all the limitations being on stage, such as not enough jungle, there's going to be a point where you're going to want a jungle 10 times the size of what you have on stage. If I'm going to have all those limitations, I want all the advantages. So, which means I want to be able to look, this way, then turn the camera 180 degrees that way, then turn the camera 180 degrees back to this way. I want to be able to shoot any direction at any time and not have to spend 2 hours watching you move lights around. So he said, I don't know what you're going to do, but whatever it is you do, make it so I can do that. Know that I'm going to be asking you to do that, to have a plan to get that done. So I said, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. And so these moving baskets were kind of the key. Because if I just hung a million lights up there, it still would have taken time to focus them and all that. And with these movable baskets, there could actually be a man in there with the lights, and we could actually move the lights while they were on. So we could create all of these beams, kind of, and set them all up parallel, and now run them through all the trees that were on the set until we found kind of the sweet spot. And it looked like, those 44 independent shafts looked like one distant light from far away, which was really something. And my concern going into that was, okay, if you have 44 lights, that means you're going to have 44 shadows at some point. Somewhere there's going to be 44 shadows, which the sun does not do. With the sun, you have all those shafts coming through, but you have one shadow. And what saved me there was the irregularity of the jungle floor. There was so much contour and foliage down there, you couldn't see all the shadows. They were there, but they just kind of got lost in the confusion of everything else that was on the jungle floor. So I was relieved about that. But I could create the shafts. In order to create the shafts, you need a medium in the air. You need smoke or something like that. And one of the tips that Alan gave me when he showed me Congo was, he said, don't use smoke. Use high pressure water. I said, huh? He said, yeah. He said, what they did on this stage, he said, under your lights, you're going to have your lights up there. It's going to be your skylight, right? Okay, so under that, they're going to install these pipes. And they're going to charge these pipes up to 1,200 PSI, and they can put these emitters in, and this water comes out almost like a vapor. And they said what these guys did was they could kind of zone these areas out, and you could come in with various amounts of pressure or amounts of water that came out of this 1,200-pound pipe that then gave you either thinner or more thick veils of smoke, and it didn't build up, and it did, and it was water, so it was easy to work in and all that, and so we did that, and our special effects guy was familiar. He was the same guy that did this for Alan, so he knew exactly what I was talking about, and he did it, and then that was a godsend, and so I had now all this control in this stage, and the stage is now very workable, and Joe liked it because he could look around, and I could easily kind of move things. Usually by the time we had the camera set up, I could move the baskets down to the other end of the stage and have my lighting changed, and it made it so I could change the look of the stage, because it's a gargantuan stage. It was the largest stage at Universal, but still, when it's a jungle exterior, that still gets pretty small, even though it's whatever it was, 200 feet by 100 feet by, I think it was 60 feet tall, almost the size of our exterior scaffold. That's how big everything was, but Ed had built the entire set against the wall and right up to the permanence, right up to the rafters. He left me zero space for lights. I mean, absolutely nothing.
It was a pure jungle.
Yes, it was pure jungle. So it's like, okay, so what am I supposed to do? Cut the roof off this place? So my lights kind of intermingled with his stuff, and it worked out great. But that's how. Ed was in the same boat. He knew he had to give Joe everything he could. He had to take every inch. He couldn't not fill every inch of that place with jungle. So, and he did a fantastic job. It's just a beautiful jungle, and did allow us to be versatile.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that people say about Jurassic Park 3 is you can't tell what's Hawaii and what is Stage 12. And I think that it just shows after what you've described, it really did pay off. Everything worked. It really does look like Hawaii. It's picture perfect.
That's good. Yeah, we actually had a lot more intercuts than we had planned. Our original plan was to keep the Stage 12 stuff kind of away from the Hawaii stuff. But, I had enough experience at that time to know, well, that's a good plan, but the reality of filmmaking is that's probably going to end up not happening. Necessity is just going to rear its ugly head, and the economy and all that stuff, and we're just going to have to intercut things. And once we had kind of proven that Stage 12 could work, that set was up for the entire run of the movie, because we kept kind of leaving it and coming back to it because they had to either redress it or move the Spinosaurus or something like that. So we would, we'd shoot on for a week, then leave for a week, and come back, and we were doing that for the entire show. So we knew after a period of time kind of what we could do on that stage and what we couldn't. There was a lot more that we could do than we thought, and so it got to the point where we were even doing wide shots in Hawaii and close-ups and on stage. It was so you could just cut it right in, and I could adjust the lighting in such a way that I could match almost any situation we had in Hawaii, which was nice.
So this may be more of a question for Ed Varro, but Jurassic Park 3 was set on the same island as the previous film, The Lost World. Was there much of a reason behind the change in scenery, as in swapping the sort of California redwoods for the lush Hawaiian jungle?
Right. No, well, I mean, that came up because that's one of the first questions I asked was, what's the look of our jungle going to be? Is it going to be more tropical? Is it going to be more of the conifers and things that were in The Lost World? And we wanted to go more of the jungle, more the jungle look of the first film. I think the discussion ended up going, well, that island is probably set up with different kinds of microclimates, and a lot of states, things change, woods change. So Joe didn't have any problem going with different jungle scenes, and in fact, even in Lost World, it changes. When they get near, because we shot in a couple of their sets, standing sets. We shot in, and that was more of a jungly look. So they did kind of mix it up, but we didn't do any of the redwood stuff. And I really liked what they did with that stuff. Those forests are in California anyway, are usually pretty difficult to shoot in.
For sure.
The National Park Service and land management, they keep a close eye, and they don't want film companies coming into a forest and upsetting the eco the eco structure of it all, and because film companies can be rather disruptive and to a delicate ecosystem. And so in Hawaii, we had to be pretty careful with where we were. We were usually always on private land and had to really have our plan stick to taking care of the land wherever we were.
I think that's what most people kind of assumed, is that because The Lost World takes place a good few years before, and then Jurassic Park 3, I think people just assumed that they took place at pretty much different parts of the island, which would make sense, as it's supposed to be quite a big island anyway.
Right. So and I like the way that the movie opens, where it's sort of this secret place where the dinosaurs have been left to kind of breed on their own, and how there's kind of these bootleg pirate parasailing tours you can get a glimpse of.
That's interesting, actually. So do you know if the script ever specified what attacked the boat during that opening sequence?
I don't know if the script ever did, because it was always scripted as we shot it, but they went into kind of this really low, almost like a cloud, and came out the other side, and the boat had been completely, had been obviously attacked, and all the crew had been taken off. So, I mean, in the conversations, I made the assumption, I went to Joseph, I'm assuming this is a Pteranodon that did this, or is it a water, what is this? And he said, no, I'm assuming it's a Pteranodon. He said, it doesn't really matter. We don't really have to show it. But he said, yeah, I'm assuming it's a Pteranodon or something like that. Even though, curiously, later in the story, we show that the way out of the aviary is the door they left open. She didn't quite latch that door, and so the idea is, okay, that's how the Pteranodons are going to get out. But I think we were kind of making taking the liberty of saying that aviary might have more than one hole in it, and some had escaped and could attack the boat.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, again, that's sort of the general belief. I think at the end of The Lost World, there is a shot that shows a couple of T-Rexes, and then it pans to the right, and there's some Pteranodons as well. So they're sort of already out in the open.
They're out.
So different species.
Yeah.
Who knows? So what was it like working with both large on-set animatronics and then post-production visual effects through ILM? Did you have to adapt to your normal way of working?
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly, this was the first film where they could commingle. In other words, in part 1 and 2, if there was a dinosaur in the frame, it either had to be an ILM CG dinosaur or a Stan Winston dinosaur. Part 3, ILM's technology had come so much closer to Stan's, and Stan's movement technology had come so much closer to ILM that now these dinosaurs could share the same frame. So we could actually have a Stan Winston foreground raptor and an ILM background raptor, and they would look the same. Where before, if they were side by side in the same frame, you'd see, okay, there's a very dramatic difference in these two animals. Yeah. It's fine on single stimulus, but whenever you had the comparison there, it didn't work at all. Here, they could do it. They had tested it, and they could do it, and they were super excited about that. And Joe liked that too, because now that freed him up to do a lot of things. And if something didn't work, or if the Stan dinosaurs were acting up, which they rarely did, he could just replace it with a CG and he'd be fine. And, so it gave him lots of options to free the camera up, make it so that dinosaurs can walk around. I mean, the Stan raptors couldn't really walk around. They were kind of on a carriage, a miniature version of the Spinosaurus, really. They had a lower body suit that John Rosengrant could wear and walk around, but you couldn't see the top half of that. Or with the regular raptors, you could see their upper 2/3 of their bodies, their tails, but not their legs, because their legs weren't there. So ILM had to provide the full figure dinosaurs, or anything that, in here he could have one actually run into frame, right into a close-up, and which was, pretty amazing. So that was really, really interesting. One interesting story about the dinosaurs, you're going in and, here's my big break on this movie. And it was like probably the first or second week I was in there. We took a trip out to Stan's shop out in the valley, and we're going to look at the state of everything. So he's in mid construction on the Spinosaurus, and they're going to kind of rebuild the T-Rex. He had a scene in our movie, and he had all the raptors, and they were pretty far along, and he was showing us all the animatronics, which were just mind-blowing how fast and everything they were. I guess in the first film, they had to do some undercranking and things like that because the dinosaurs could only move so fast. So they had to shoot essentially in fast motion to try to, so they could look natural. I think in the Crichton book, he talks about how they're almost bird-like and how deceivingly fast these dinosaurs move. And here Stan had actually tuned these dinosaurs up to the point where they were fast. They moved quickly. They were very twitchy and really, really neat looking. But they didn't quite have paint jobs or anything yet. But he did have these maquettes. He had these beautiful maquettes, so these models, miniature models of the finished dinosaurs that had the finished paint, the finished kind of coatings on them, so you can kind of tell what the light would do. And I had done some tests on stills and different types of light to get an idea of what the skin's like and the colors and all that kind of stuff. So I was getting to know a little of what it was. And Stan was explaining to me, the only reason the way you can tell the difference between a male and a female is the color of the eyes. So he said, make sure that we're giving you enough differentiation between the male eyes and the female eyes, so the audience can kind of, I think one had yellow eyes, one had blue eyes. I think the female had blue eyes. And so he was, giving me all this, and I gave Janusz a call at that point, because my head was all around these dinosaurs, and so he was in town and he called me back, and I remember I was on the freeway when he called. And when he called, I pulled over because I didn't want to let this opportunity slip through my fingers.
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk to Janusz so bad, and so I'm there on the side of the freeway and talking to him, and so I'm asking him, okay, I just went to Stan's place and there are all these maquettes and these, did you do anything with the skin, the gloss? Did you do anything with the color? And I'm asking all these technical questions, and I'm mid-sentence, and I just hear him say, okay, stop. And he goes, okay, you have to realize you're working with people who are the best at what they do. You're working with the top creature effects, the top special effects, top visual effects. absolutely, these people are on top of the pyramid, and there's nothing that you can say to them that's going to allow them to do their job better. He said, your job is to give these dinosaurs a world to live in. You don't need to worry about any of this. Any of the stuff that's in your head right now, just put it out of your head and create a world for them. That's your job. So I thought to myself, oh man, that is really smart. Yeah. And actually makes my job easier now. I'm so glad I don't need to worry about any of this. I can just he's right. I can just let these experts be experts.
For sure.
And stop this.
Yeah.
Just work. that was his whole thing. Don't get lost in the weeds of this. It's like you create a world for these creatures and exercise your area of expertise. And so, which I thought was just the best advice ever. So I was so appreciative.
Yeah.
That it was such a short conversation, but man, he just nailed it. And
sure. Hearing that from somebody like him as well really must ease any concerns.
It makes an impression.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that he stopped me mid-sentence to kind of point it out. Man, are you ever barking up the wrong tree at this point? Like, you have to reverse direction real fast. And I was so happy that he was so frank with me. And that's something that happens when you talk to cinematographers. Here I had Alan Dabbio giving me this advice. I had Janusz Kaminski giving advice, and I had other cinematographers as well being very generous with their ideas, and that's sort of the way cinematographers are. We're a very kind of open society and help each other, and I'm amazed by that because not many occupations in the film business really have that kind of openness, but here it did, and I was the direct beneficiary of all this. So these are all people who are being generous to me that now I have to pay this forward somehow, so I'm going to work that out.
Well, I'm sure you already have. Another amazing sequence in the movie was the riverboat attack sequence with the Spinosaurus. What challenges presented themselves? Because there must have been loads with rain, animatronics, and the fire.
Yeah. It was challenges for everybody. Anytime you're working on water with cameras and lights and all that, that's a challenge right off the bat. So you have to have a plan in terms of, Joe likes to move the camera. So if we're going to get cranes out there on the water and all that, they have to be cranes. And these are all automated cranes. These are all electrically driven cranes that are computerized at telescope. And, he wants to have options, and he likes to adjust the shot between takes. So if we're going to get all this out in the middle of the water, we have to build either barges or platforms. You have to, it's a large installation, and you're surrounded by a lot of scaffold that needs to move around. And we shot all that stuff at Falls Lake. Now we're doing the night sequence. We took our big scaffold away. The same cliffs that Ed built were still there, but now we're at night. So we kind of rejigged that area, got rid of our scaffold. We'd shot all our Pteranodon stuff, got rid of that, and relit it for night. And now we're in the exact same spot. So they took the Spinosaurus from stage 12 and plunked him in the water in Falls Lake, which Stan was really excited about. He was worried and excited at the same time. He sort of cautioned us. He said, hey, look, the first time we activate the Spinosaurus, make sure the cameras are rolling, because you may get one take out of him and he'll short out, and that'll be the end of that, We'll have to, but he said, or he may keep working. We don't really know. He's tested and, he's gotten pretty wet, but being in the water is a whole different story with everybody. So he had his challenges. I know that the special effects had their challenges because they had to build a controllable fire, on water, which is impossible. Obviously you can throw gas out and set it on fire, but we're not going to do that on a movie set. We had to do something that was safe and controllable. So he had these underwater propane, whatever pipes, and it was very, very, very involved with the fire. And of course, now all this is in there together. Now you've got my cameras and lights, Stan's, Spinosaurus, and 700 hydraulic tubes that feed out of him. Plus, you have all the pipes, and now we're all moving our stuff, and we're all. The thing was probably like 3 feet deep of water, something like that. So we're all kind of moving around. We're all wearing waders and working in the water. So it was kind of slow going at night. Rain was also falling, lightning. So cranes, just the amount of gear was pretty staggering. But then all those elements kind of come together, and you have multiple cameras. You have the boat out there, the actors are out there, the Spinosaurus is moving, and when they activated that Spinosaurus, my God, it was really amazing. Because he could stick his head in the water. He was sticking his snout in the water, almost to the bottom of the lake, and kind of thrashing around. And that was the puppeted Spinosaurus that we had on stage, and he never quit. He kept going and going and going. And Stan was very excited that it was working this well, and looked so good because he was displacing so much water. The water gives an automatic sense of scale. There's two things that give away scale. If I'm doing a miniature, one is water, the other is fire. So we had both. So with the presence of water and fire, you could see how truly big that creature was, because of course the Stan version was 1-to-1 scale, was full size, and so he was displacing that much water. I mean, just hundreds of pounds of water with one head swipe. So, and it was flying off and kind of running down his body. And it was, I remember Stan went to dailies, after our first night, and he was watching the dailies of his creature moving around. And he was so tickled. He was so happy. He said that was some of the best dailies he had seen, not because of the photography, but because of what he was able to achieve on camera. He was just so happy that we got that on camera. In such a way, because he said that's something you guys have to. He said, "Yeah, you guys have to understand the impossibility of this." You can't take an animatronic dinosaur into a lake like this. This has never happened. And so we were.
It's such a contrast for him on the first Jurassic. It's quite a famous story now of that it started raining, the T-Rex got wet, and then it was just vibrating and not responding.
Yes.
And then he has this, a few years later, he's working and he's got his huge Spinosaurus in the lake, just operating perfectly.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we had heard, of course, you're working on this movie, so you hear all the stories from all the other movies. We heard them all. There are just thousands of stories of these epic, conditions. And the first one too, where they're kind of inventing all this stuff for the first time, was such an achievement. And even with the problems they had, it was still miraculous, and then it got even more and more miraculous. He was a really interesting guy. He was such a positive guy. He was very much a showman. He was very showy about his effects and
his creations.
It was about, but it was from his passion. It was like he was really a fun guy, and he got really into it when you did a good job with his stuff. If he had a special need and you were able to help his creature, perform better, he really appreciated that a lot, so he was a pretty cool guy, and his whole group were so great. He had a very loyal group that had been from movie to movie to movie. He had a very long standing kind of group of employees that were all experts and very, very good at what they did. And Janusz was right. I had nothing to worry about with anyone else.
Just trust
They were all amazing. Yep, trust Stan.
So Joe Johnston, he'd been quite candid about the difficulties of the script and the budget and how the movie continued to evolve as such. Could you elaborate about your experience with that?
Yeah, there was a frustration with the script. I think that he had been pushing for much more of a personal story. In the way Joe makes movies, and you look at all his films, particularly movies like Jumanji, of course, October Sky, and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Those are all films about characters.
Yeah.
And the characters happen to be in this very adventurous and impossible setting, but it's a story. In Jumanji, it's a story about a father and a son, that type of story was missing here. And it was a lot of amazing set pieces and a very adventurous continuum, almost like a comic book, but missing the characters. Joe likes to tell his stories from the character's point of view. And one of the first things he told me is that, these types of movies, it's going to be very tempting to go for that Hollywood shot, go for that big crane shot, go for that aerial, go for, the showing the eye candy of it all. He said, we're not going to do any of that. He said, I only want you to put a camera where either a character or a dinosaur can go. So I want the audience to have an appreciation for the characters in our story, and that's the way we're going to do it. And so with that, he was still kind of missing the story of the character. The boy was always on the island. His family story had not been really fully fleshed out, and Sam was going to be on the island, and that's about all we had. So eventually, the boy, would be found, and so, but there wasn't a whole ending in place, and so there was a lot of open-endedness to it. So as they're going through all the rewrites, of course, as department heads, we're all kind of wondering, what's going to change? We're putting so much large-scale stuff into motion here. If we get a new script, we could be wasting just months of work here. And so they would assure us, no, we're still going to do these set pieces. So there's still going to be, a pteranodon attack. There's still going to be, a Spinosaurus T-Rex fight. There's still going to be, X, Y, Z, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So he said, plan for all that. It's just going to be the actual storytelling is going to be different. So they ended up doing taking a month off to have a rewrite done by Alexander Payne. And Alexander was going to be kind of fleshing out whatever this character story was. And I guess he had talked to Joe and something, but they were going to take 30 days to do this. And they told everybody, okay, except for the art department, everybody just goes home. And I refused to go home. I kept working because I had so much work to do. So, I didn't care if they didn't pay me. I was just going to stay. And part of me was probably thinking, gee, if I go home, they'll replace me. So I never left. So I just kept working, and they did end up paying me, but I refused to go home, and which is funny. But I got to kind of see what was going on, and it actually gave Joe and I a chance to talk, and for me to kind of get in with the art department and see what they were up to. It gave us a chance to kind of slow down and refine our plan a little more. And when Alexander's draft came back, he had created the whole story of the Kirbys, the divorced parents, kid lost on the island by the stepfather, and the father was kind of faked his way into hiring these mercenary security squad to come help him. That the first sight of any dinosaur, they weren't off the plane for 2 minutes before they were running back, and the first roar, just get out of here. They were in over their heads, 30 seconds into their first, So that all kind of came from the Alexander Payne draft. So now things were starting to kind of fall into place. The story of the broken family and the fact that they could work together to help find the child, and when they find the child, that could be something significant. And the Sam story was still kind of lacking a little bit because, of course, they would have loved to have had more going on with him and the actress, nuts.
Taylor Yoni?
No.
Laura Dern.
Laura Dern, yeah, of course. But Laura wasn't going to be in the movie proper, but she was going to be in it at some point. But they would have loved to have had more happen for Sam. And interesting, the one thing that never happened on the Alexander Payne script was an ending. He had only rewritten the first 2 acts. So Act 3 was still up in the air. So Joe wasn't too happy about that. But he had a story to start with. And so we had to start shooting. And so away we went. We started shooting without an ending, which I think leads a lot, to Joe's frustration and how he was never, I don't think he has said he's never going to do that again. Yeah. Where he enters into a story that's this open-ended. And ever since then, on every movie I've done with him, that script has to be, dialed in and finished. It has to be really in order before he'll engage with it. Yeah. And I think he kind of doesn't want to repeat this again. That said, he is an incredible director, and he was just so consistent in terms of this, shooting the stories from the character's point of view, staying involved with the characters. That was he's got just an incredible focus on that, and which I think is what makes his films so successful, and so much fun to watch, and why they're so memorable. And he's one of those few guys who can really do that. And there's a lot of big big epic directors who don't do that, who do well, but their stories kind of ring hollow because you're kind of wondering why can't I get into these characters?
Why can't I connect to it?
Yeah. And so even with the frustrations, I think there's a lot of success in what he did. I think he would have loved to have had the chance to have that whole story in front of him so that he could really navigate and create an encompassing plan where everything was paid off. And I think he didn't really have the chance to do that, unfortunately, which might lead to some of his frustration with it,
For sure.
But I thought he did wonders with what he had,
Yeah, no, totally. In that earlier draft of the script that you had read, do you remember it being subtitled Extinction or Breakout, or in any of the production offices? Do you remember that title ever being shown?
No, I don't. When I came on, they wouldn't, as you know from the interview, they wouldn't let me read the script when I went in to meet Joe, so we just talked about his other movies. And when I did finally get to read the script, I had to read it outside of Joe's office. I had to sit in the chair. And then while his assistant looked at me and stared at me, read the whole thing and give it back,
Wow.
I couldn't even keep it. And in fact, I finished the script, and the production manager came by, and I must have had this 1,000-yard stare because of this script that I read. There was going to be all these magnificent, hugely complicated sequences, and I probably was somewhat stunned. And the production manager came up to me and said, "Oh, Shelly, you look like you just read the script." It's like, yes, I did. I look forward to talking to you about it. But I had to give it back, but no, I don't remember those titles being there. So whatever happened prior to that, I had to basically the draft we shot and the draft prior was where I entered the story. So whatever previous drafts, I'm sure there were dozens of them. I wasn't any part of. Joe, I'm sure was a big part of.
Yeah, for
a lot of previous drafts. Yeah.
It's sort of another thing was one of the unreleased poster designs that was released. It was on the Jurassic Park 3 DVD, but it shows a human fetus in the logo. Did that earlier script that you read ever indicate or give any context to what that might be for?
No, but I mean, obviously that was something that sort of with the human, not really the human side, but I think it was gonna be kind of coming about around Jurassic 4. It was something that I think that Steven had been kicking around. On these movies, there's always kind of something he wanted to do that never really he could do. Like, for instance, on Lost World, when that T-Rex sticks his head through the waterfall, that was supposed to be in part one. It's in the book, and with that moment. And they never could do it. And they never could figure it out, probably because it wouldn't work for Stan.
Yeah.
But they got it into part two, and then in part three, the one I did, they really wanted Pteranodon to attack a helicopter. That's something they really wanted. Steven was wanted this with a passion, and wanted us to work out how to do it, and that never happened. But there it is in part 4.
Yeah.
So there might have been some kind of ripple effect, something, but I don't know what the human fetus stands for. That was never part of any conversation I was involved with.
Okay.
But it's an interesting image, and in fact, I haven't even noticed that. So I'm going to really look at this DVD.
Yeah. There's some really cool poster designs on there, and a lot of them do say Extinction or Breakout, but obviously art department could have been very early on. You mentioned in that earlier script, obviously it's been a long time since you would have read it, but you mentioned there were a lot of heavy, large sequences and large scale stuff. Do you remember if it wasn't predominantly, the family story and the rescuing the boy, was it something to do with the mainland, or do you remember if it was, what the story was?
I did not see anything with the mainland. It was a story that just wasn't fleshed out yet. Now there could have been versions prior.
Sure.
And Lost World kind of takes a big left turn, when they leave that island and go to San Diego.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion about how people feel about that, and I think Steven wanted to do that. He wanted to, to have almost that Godzilla King Kong moment where they arrive and there they are at in our modern society, and he wanted that involvement, and there was no version of that was going to happen here. At one point, I believe there was, I'm not sure if it was written or not, or just a big discussion. I know there's some illustrations of a Pteranodon attacking a helicopter, like a big helicopter, like a Black Hawk, a big one.
Yeah.
And like when they fly away at the end of it, it's something that size, they were going to attack that and, make their way through the windshield, kind of like they did with the little helicopter in Park 4.
Yeah. That would have been very cool to shoot.
Yeah, it would have been. And in fact, we were kind of waiting for it, because as they fly out, that's where it was. It was the last thing, was this attack, and they had to get out of it, and it ended up getting cut because of the just expense. Everything, you're at the end of the movie now, and that was a sequence we had least worked out, where everything else we had sets for and had worked it out, and it just didn't seem like it was going to be viable. Yeah. So, and it was sort of an extra beat anyway. They're now off the island. Okay, now they're going to be attacked again. And kind of get out of it again. So it was sort of like an extra step anyway. Even though the movie is short, it's not a long movie. I think our movie is barely over 90 minutes.
Yeah.
So it moves along quickly. It's very fast paced. So there's not a lot of sitting around.
But I think that's why. I think that is why a lot of people. Jurassic Park 3, it's got that same feel as the first two. It feels like a Jurassic Park film, but it's only around 90 minutes. It's got, like you said, it's fast paced, and it's got this nice feel to it. You can kind of have it on, and it's just perfect dose of Jurassic Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that Joe does very well, is he paces his movies well. And he definitely gives himself options. He knows he's made enough movies where he knows pace is going to be something. So he gives himself enough options. In fact, his earlier films, he played a lot of shots in single shots, a lot of scenes, and kind of the way Spielberg does, where he'll play a long shot or a very wide shot for 2 pages. You'll sit there for a full figure shot. Joe used to do that kind of stuff, and he does it less now, because I think he's more concerned about wanting to manipulate pace and keep the audience engaged, and he doesn't want a long shot that he has no control over pace over to stand in the way of that. So that's definitely important to him. But it's surprisingly short, for sure. But I like it. It does kind of give you everything you want from a
Yeah. No, it definitely does do that. So Joe Johnson was attached to direct Jurassic Park 4 for quite some time after Jurassic Park 3's release. After you and him had built that sort of solid working relationship on the third, were you sort of automatically on that with him? Had you discussed Jurassic Park 4 with him?
We did discuss it, yeah. I'm not sure I would have automatically been on. Nothing's automatic with him. I sort of have to earn my way onto every project, but it was definitely in the discussion. He was, he played so much of that close to the vest. I don't think there was much he could talk about. Yeah. But he told me, what was out there. I guess he told me that there was a story of, creating an army of raptors as kind of this invincible army was in the storyline, which you kind of see, in Part 4, you see, Chris Pratt out there training the raptors, and you see the military, contractors, realizing
talking about it,
the profit potential of this, and so, but they never really do it, and so I'm not sure what Joe was reading, if they were actually going to war or what it was, but I know that 4 went through a whole slew of iterations, and I think that the finished version, what they ended up shooting on 4, was very different than the film that Joe was considering making, way back then.
Yeah, because I remember that there was the 2004 leaked script from John Sayles that came out, which opened with a scene on the first island, and then it was about velociraptors that have been trained for warfare, and I think they rescue a young girl that had been abducted by a terrorist organization or something. It definitely wasn't in line with previous Jurassics, but it was an interesting direction. But I think I
Yeah.
remember Joe was still talking about Jurassic in around 2010, saying it will be like unlike anything we've seen before, and that it's the beginning of a new trilogy. Do you know what
Right.
the story was at that point? Was it still sort of the dinosaurs in warfare scenario, or had they moved?
I believe I didn't read anything, but my conversations with him kind of led to that was kind of more the direction they were going to go.
Yeah.
You know, they obviously switched gears in a major way because that's not at all what they ended up doing. And when they would have changed gears quite quickly because Joe wasn't off the movie for very long before Colin Trevorrow came on and they started shooting. So you know, so they whatever it was that Joe left, they changed it, you know, quite dramatically. So, but yeah, I never read any of it, but it was something along the lines of an army, which I can only surmise that's what he was talking about in terms of it being a very different kind of, you know, franchise.
For sure. Well, after your work on Jurassic Park 3 and the prospect of lighting and shooting another, had you had time to think about what direction you would have liked to take it in? Obviously, it depends on what Joe wants and what the script
Yeah.
was like. But had you had an idea about the way you wanted it to kind of look or what you wanted to explore?
Yeah, if I could do it again, I think that the moodier stuff in that movie is where the movie starts to kind of hit a tone that makes the island feel a lot more mysterious, less of a tropical, you know, paradise, and much more of a mysterious and scary place. And I would have liked to have kind of gone for that tone, even with the Kirby story and that little nod to comedy that Alexander Payne put in there. You know, I think it still work in a very more threatening environment. So I would have loved for it to have gotten a little darker and things like that. I mean, I think we did the best we could given the fact it was 20 years ago, a 20-year-old technology. I mean, these days, shooting on digital with LED lighting, it would be a whole different experience. You know, these setups would be very different looking and feel different. And I think there'd be one thing that happens with digital is that you see a much better rendition of the image as you're shooting. So it now becomes very easy for me to kind of sell an idea of moodiness because what they're seeing on set looks much like the image that we're capturing. Where in film, you know, you didn't really see the image until it went through the lab process. The video assist that we had on the set looked nothing like it was going to look. It was blown out, and the video taps on film cameras were terrible.
Yeah.
You know, and it's nothing you would ever judge an image on it. And what ends up happening is you get that film print done, and they start cutting. Well, whatever it is they're cutting with, they fall in love with. So if that print is a couple of points too bright or something like that, they're going to want it to stay bright. And or if ILM is giving, renders of their visual effects that have a certain amount of brightness to them, so you can see the detail, and that doesn't get adjusted while they're cutting, they'll fall in love with all that detail. And so now this idea of toning everything down to a much more mysterious, you know, kind of vocabulary becomes less important than seeing that detail. And so in the case of digital, you get much more of a crack at getting my values where I want them, you know. So I think I could get people to embrace a much more mysterious tone right out of the starting gate, you know. So in that case, it'd be different. So, you know, in other words, I would give them something, you know, to fall in love with in that direction, you know, because no matter what they get, they're going to fall in love with it later. You know, they get used to seeing what they're seeing, you know.
So we've had. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to me, that's when I look at that movie, that's kind of the one thing that I wish I'd done more of, was just make it a little more moody, you know.
Oh, it's music to my ears, though. I think for me, that's what Jurassic is. It's moody, it's mysterious, it's dark. And Jurassic Park 3 still fits in that. I love the aviary sequence, as I said before. So we've had a couple of extra questions from people about specifics of the movies. There was before the Spinosaurus, the main villain was supposed to be the Baryonyx. That was the primary new dinosaur. Do you know how that was supposed to function as the new villain? If it was supposed to be smaller than the T-Rex, which was the sort of king at the time.
Yeah, in fact, I think the first version that I read, they were actually calling the Spinosaurus a Baryonyx.
Right.
But Stan had built a Spinosaurus, and they look similar. The Baryonyx doesn't have the big sail on the back, but the head is a very similar, almost identical. But the Baryonyx, I think, is considerably smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Baryonyx is slightly bigger than, well, a lot bigger than a raptor, but probably less than halfway toward the size of a Spinosaurus. So I think what they decided, as far as I know, they loved the idea of the sail on the back, yeah, and they liked the idea of having just more size, more weight. And actually, now that I think about it, Spinosaurus does have a sail, but they did the size was sort of the thing. And when you got them next to each other, because we did have the T-Rex and the Spinosaurus on the same stage, that Spinosaurus was monumentally bigger.
Just giant.
He was huge. He was very, very large. Yeah, and scary. His teeth, just those rows of teeth and all that, and he was a very scary animal. Interesting that when they got them together, the T-Rex could actually move faster, and he had a lot more articulation. The Spinosaurus had that big, long snout, and there wasn't a lot of animation, between his neck and his mouth. So his head kind of moved kind of like a big club, and the T-Rex head was, of course, much smaller and could articulate. They could both articulate the same way, but for some reason the T-Rex carried that movement, a little more like an animal would. And so I think, one of the things, like whenever the Spinosaurus would like just move his head either from side to side, well, his snout was like 6 or 7 feet long, and so if he just turned his head to the right, you're panning the camera probably 21 feet, to hold that movement, which means you're seeing, off the set just with a close up, of him. He was so big, so we had to. But that was part of it was showing the size of him, I think, as far as I know.
Yeah, for sure. That must have been quite the challenge to work with.
Yeah.
So were there any new dinosaurs or any other dinosaurs that didn't make it into the final cut that you know of?
I don't think so. I think they got everything in there. I forget the one where they're kind of digging through the big dinosaur poop, and that one comes out of the trees there. He was really interesting looking. They wanted to get him in there. They have the compies. They've got a lot of the dinosaurs are making their kid little cameos, and I was really happy that the T-Rex was there.
Yeah.
But I think that they were. What was really interesting was the Raptors had really developed the most. They were amazing in terms of how they moved, and so I think so much of the story revolved around the Raptors, and what Stan was able to do with them was so amazing. But I don't remember any other ones. I'm trying to think if there's any flying ones or no. I think there was. I don't remember anything getting cut in terms of on the species level.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Velociraptors. How were they conceived during pre-production? Do you remember why they were given the sort of feathers on their head as opposed to the previous Raptors?
Yeah, they had changed. In fact, when you look at the first movie, they look a certain way. They look at the second movie, they have almost like tiger stripes.
Yeah,
they're super colorful. And the third movie, I think the quills and things on their head were something that I think Stan had always wanted to do. Was kind of that little nod to what Crichton talked about, their kind of bird, genesis of, dinosaurs and being bird-like. And I think they had found even evidence in the amount of time. Of course, we had Jack Horner, who's our paleontologist expert, and he would talk about what the Spinosaurus had. So he was very involved in the design of the Raptors, and they had toned the colors down and all that. So I know that Stan and Joe and Jack were all very, very happy with this version of the Raptor. The eyes, I remember the eyes were incredible. When I first saw them, it's like, my God, whatever Stan is doing, when he makes these eyes, because, you know, you're looking right into the soul of the character. The eyes are everything. And every character had, the Spinosaurus had eyes that were just miraculous. And I have no idea if he's making these things out of glass or what he's doing, but man, he has figured out how to, the eyes of his creatures. And of course they figure so prominently on a raptor. You see them so well, and just everything about them, the gloss and the coloring, how they catch light, the way they move around. He has put a lot of effort into his eye design, because that is the character, and which was pretty staggering.
Yeah. And
we had one flashback, and there's one thing that where Stan is in the airplane, and he's sleeping, and he wakes up, and it's kind of a nightmare, and he sees a raptor sitting next to him on the airplane, and so there were discussions about this, and Stan had made, there's all, like a raptor head that could almost be puppeted. It didn't have the body attached. Of course, he had the whole, almost the entire raptor. He had the lower half. He had raptors without tails, with tails. He had all different versions of raptors. So here, to get it on the plane, we needed to have, the puppeted raptor, the one that's just the head and the neck. That's the only thing that would fit in the airplane, because it's a small plane. And but the only version of that raptor they had was our version of the raptor, so which with our paint job on that raptor.
Yeah.
So it was discussed. So the only other time Sam has seen raptors was in part 1. So they wanted this raptor to be colored like those raptors, which was very different. They were very gray.
Yeah.
In part 1, and didn't have anywhere near the amount of coloring that we had in part 3, and part 2 they went even more with the coloring, but they wanted these to be very gray. And so, Stan was asking me, is there anything you can do with the lighting to help knock this color down? So I had to I took our part 3 raptor and kind of reflected light off of them. So I was kicking light into them, so you couldn't really see the paint on them, but more kind of reflecting light off of his skin, so the color kind of went away. Then I could just kind of reflect in kind of this gray blue light on him and make him look like the older raptor, and very different. I think they may have pulled the quills out of his head or something. So that was an interesting challenge to take our modern raptor and make him look like the older raptor.
Yeah, for sure.
because that was Sam's memory of a raptor.
Wow. Oh, it's interesting that was talked about. Yeah, because it's something that people have wondered for a while. It's a dream sequence, so it can be anything it wants to be, but yeah. Oh, fascinating. So do you remember any truth? There was a rumor going around that the Spinosaurus was originally going to be killed by a pack of velociraptors. Is that something you remember reading or hearing about?
They went through so many different endings. It's possible they would have entertained that, maybe just to show the threat of the raptor and just set up, the killing power of an army of these things. Yeah, right. It does sound, I don't remember if that was in, I don't remember, but it does sound like something that would be in.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds pretty plausible based on where we know they were trying to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty reluctant to kill the Spinosaurus. I mean, and even the way they scare him off, I mean, he does catch fire, but he gets out of there.
Yeah.
And that's kind of it for him. And the Raptors kind of see it through to the end. But I don't remember reading a script that had a scene where he got killed, though.
Gotcha. So
actually, maybe I take that back. They may have attacked him at the end. It could be. Boy, now I'm trying to remember. There might have been a version where the Raptors came. He was about to attack the family, and they came and killed him. You might be right about that.
Uh-huh.
Now that I'm this synapse, 20-year-old synapse is just starting to fire. That actually may have been a thing.
You'll be digging up scripts after this call. You'll be trying to figure it out.
I only wish I could. I don't even know what happened to my script, but I wish to God I still had it. But because that would have one thing. It would have is not the ending that's there, because that came about way at the end. Yeah.
So you've worked in the industry for a long time now. What would you say your favorite project that you've worked on has been?
Well, sir, it's hard to choose one because they're all, they all develop kind of in their own way.
It's huge
Anything I
variety that
do,
you've shot. Serious variety.
yeah, yeah, my TV training and that whole chameleon thing, still
Yeah.
still going strong.
For sure.
The So in other words, there's a different kind of artistic goals for each of these projects that are so different, and different levels of satisfaction. I'm pretty hard on myself in terms of my performance on films. I don't look at the films and think, oh, that was a success. I look at a film and think, wow, there's so many things I could have done better
Yeah.
on these. So the one that's the freshest is the one that I'm probably the most jazzed about. But the ones I've done with Joe are different than any other film. Working with him is a very, very different experience. And now that we have, I think we've done 5 together now. It has developed into quite a nice director DP pairing, and interestingly, it's almost like a relationship where you can't become complacent with anything. You have to really put a lot of effort into that collaboration, and never rest on your laurels, and which Joe never lets me do anyway. He has a very sarcastic sense of humor, and he's very good at putting me in my place and making sure there's no laurels anywhere near for me to rest upon. But he's very appreciative of a good job, and we talk a lot about what our goals are, and we've become pretty good friends, and so that's enormously gratifying to work with him. I did a film recently that was a Tom Hanks film that hasn't come out yet, called Greyhound, where he's commanding this World War II destroyer across the Atlantic, and which is very, very different than Jurassic or Hidalgo or Captain America or Wolfman. They're all so different, and that one's more of a straight up story about how the clock is ticking and either across the Atlantic and they're being attacked by U-boats and all that. So you've got these stories that are just so incredibly different, and they're all satisfying in some way. But I think that every film I've done with Joe has brought an immense amount of growth, because he challenges me to do things I didn't know I could do, and so from that comes this this very, very satisfying feeling, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And you had a really interesting process, a very unique process for both lighting the Wolfman and developing the film, specifically the scenes at night. Is there anything you could tell us about that? The Wolfman's truly, I really think it's a beautiful movie. I remember when I first saw it, it's gorgeous, and I've used it ever since then to light my own projects, just based on the nighttime and the silhouettes and everything that you did there.
Yeah, the nights are interesting. I came on very late to the Wolfman because Joe took it over.
Yeah.
There's another different director was on it. He came onto it 3 weeks before they started shooting. Wow. And I came onto it 2 weeks before they started shooting. And so we had to hit the ground running real fast. And I remember the first thing on the Wolfman, in terms of the mood and all that, we had a makeup and hair test. And so I decided I'm going to make this makeup and hair test unlike any other makeup and hair test I've ever done. I'm going to make this really moody, and I'm going to start developing a look here, because I need to get some feedback.
Yeah.
We're starting in like a week now, and I need to get some feedback and know where we are. So I did that, and Joe was very happy. The producers were still on the fence with what I was doing, but Joe was very happy and encouraged me to do more of the kinds of things I was doing. So then it comes time to do the forest stuff. And I had this idea on how to shoot it, but we needed sort of this location to kind of work for us. My idea was, don't just hang a moon up over a forest like any other cameraman can do any day of the week. Put a big light on a crane, bam, there's your moonlight. That was just too boring and too easy and too kind of middle of the road. And so I thought, okay, my feeling was, okay, if you're a werewolf, your senses are, hyper realized, so you're seeing things you don't normally see under a human condition. You're feeling, the blood rushing through people's veins. There's a sensory idea that can manifest itself in somewhat of an abstraction with how we see this forest. And so I had this idea to instead of lighting them from the moon above, which is a pretty key point in a Wolfman story. That full moon is, there for a reason. But my thought was, why not make the forest abstract so that, through the eyes of the wolf and on this full moon night, this forest looked completely different. And so my thought was to underlight them. So to bring all this light in from under the trees, and blow some smoke through there so that the trees become kind of this sculptural and menacing, these forms that are kind of back there, and the opposite of kind of basically turn the whole lighting of a forest upside down. So I did that, and I remember I needed to find a location where this worked, and so we were going to be doing our first, forest stuff. And so I went to the location on Sunday, and I told Joe on that Friday prior, it's like, I'm going to go to the location and find, it's okay with you if I find an area and pitch it to you? I'll take stills and all that, and I'll pitch it to you, and how a place that we can work all these scenes where I can still get this lighting effect I want. Because what I needed was the actors to be on this kind of high ground, and I needed the forest to kind of fall off into this little slope so I could basically have a low-lying area where I could hide all my lights for this underlighting. So I needed to be able to underlight the forest without seeing the lights. And so I found it on this Sunday and took a lot of stills and came back on Monday morning and showed them all to Joe, but while we were lighting our other set, I was explaining, here's how we can lay the scene out. He okayed all that. That was fine. And so, now it comes time to shoot it. So I've got all my lights down in this surrounding this little area, this raised area, and all these lights are coming up, and we got the smoke blowing through there, and it's exactly what we wanted. And so I'm at the monitors, and we're setting up the shots, and I'm starting to hear this murmuring from behind me of all the producers, the same producers who were kind of casting doubt on the makeup and haircuts, and now they're not too happy with how this is lit. So they say to me, Shelly, is this your lighting? Is this it? I said, yeah, this is the plan. And they said, well, where's that light coming from? Isn't the moon coming above them? How come there's all this light coming from the bottom? This doesn't look right at all. And an interesting phenomenon is that, when you're working, the director and the DP are probably one of the few people that really have a feeling for the scene's composition in the larger telling of a story. Yeah. Most everybody else views a scene on a completely different level. An actor will view a scene on a character level. A producer will usually view a scene on a scene level and expect every scene to have a beginning, middle, and end, things like that. And there's rarely more than two people who actually know this scene's composition in that telling of the story. And I was explaining to the producers, well, my feeling is that in the telling of the story, when they come into this forest lit this way, this is going to be an otherworldly event. This is going to be a very specialized thing. It's going to be an identifier for this movie. It's going to be, something that will only happen on these full moon nights, and completely taking into account the sensitized state of this werewolf, and that's why we're doing it. So there's a reason for it to be here, and they were coming back with essentially, well, we don't like it. And Joe was sitting there and kind of listening to all this, and I was thinking to myself, oh man, if they decide to kill this lighting setup, I don't have another option here. I didn't order the cranes. I don't have a moon up there. I went all in on this because I got it all approved through Joe. So this is it. If they want to relight this, we got to come back another day. I'm thinking to myself, so I'm kind of getting a little concerned. So Joe kind of turns his head. He's got his back to us. He kind of turns around kind of halfway. And he goes, what are you guys talking about? and the producers say, well, we just think this type of lighting is way too theatrical and not real enough. And so Joe takes a pause and he looks at me and goes, Shelly, don't change a thing. And he turns back to the producer and says, Shelly's not changing anything. This is lit exactly the way I want it. And he goes, Shelly, get back to work.
Shut down.
It's like, my God. And I tell that story a lot because it's there aren't a lot of moments where a director will save the cameraman from producers, who were out to kill that setup. And That's what Joe is. If Joe is on board, and he and I talk about this kind of stuff, and I explained he wasn't seeing this for the first time. He knew this is what I was going to do.
Yeah.
Because this was the plan, and I was so impressed when he came to my aid, because I was getting, normally when a conversation gets to that point on a film set, most directors will say, "Yeah, Shelly, why isn't that light up there? What are you doing anyway?" And then I'm done. But Joe really stood up for me. So with that only encourages me to do more for him, and to, I kind of knew, well, if I'm pleasing the director, that's my job. I'm the director's absolutely. DP. I don't work. Yes, I work for the producer, but we all are making the director's movie, And if the producer and the director aren't aligned, that's sort of between them. I'm aligned with the director, and we're doing our thing, so that only made me want to work harder for him, to show that level of support for such an aggressive idea. And granted, when you're doing it, it does feel weird. I don't blame these producers one bit, because even while I was doing it, it's like, man, this feels really strange to like.
Yeah.
And I have to keep telling myself, nope, the composition and the larger telling of the story. The whole story is going to arc and end here, and this is going to be, almost like a centerpiece of where we're going with it all. And this type of light is here for a reason. And so I was happy that I didn't censor myself. There's an example of not reining myself in.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think it paid off. I mean, the Wolfman, that scene especially is iconic in the way it looks, the silhouetted trees, but it's gothic, and it fits the context of the story. It works entirely.
That's good.
You also shot, which totally took me by surprise. I was watching Hurricane Heist, which is a disaster movie, and I was really surprised to see your name at the end of that. So what led to that project, and did you look at other disaster movies for inspiration?
What led me to that project was Rob Cohen. Rob was, I think he actually even had spoken to another DP about doing that movie, and he called me one day and said, "Hey, let's meet for lunch." And while we were at lunch, he kind of explained, and I didn't really know Rob. I knew him as a producer. Rob has an interesting past, because he used to be vice president of Motown. Motown. Wow. He was vice president of the record label Motown, so he was working just under Berry Gordy, and this is like his second career. His film director thing came about way late, because when he was at Motown, he was put in charge of all their movies, all the Diane Ross movies and The Wiz and things like that. He was there to kind of make sure all their artists were treated properly on these movies, and then he became a director. And he did the Fast and Furious, the first Fast and Furious, and other things. And so I knew him as a producer he had a production company with John Badham, and we had done some movies for television for them. And Rob would always call me, and when he saw dailies, and say wonderful things about the dailies. He's a very positive guy, a very nice guy. And I always liked talking to Rob, but I'd never really met him, but I really liked talking to him on the phone. And so when we met for lunch, I was kind of telling him, do you remember that I worked for you, as a producer? And he actually hadn't, He's like, oh, well, he didn't even remember, But he asked me about doing this film, and it was a funny film because we were shooting in Bulgaria, and which when you shoot a movie in Bulgaria, I've done a couple there. You're usually there because you're making a big film that they can't really afford to make, and so they're trying to make a big film, but you're gonna get through it, and this film was almost like a B film. It was almost so crazy. It was never going to be like this high quality disaster film, but it was going to be kind of this B film. And I'm curious to see how Rob was going to do it. And it was really interesting how he got the actors involved, and he wanted the actors to be very much involved with their stunt work, and interestingly. And this is the amazing thing about that film, those stunts where those guys are jumping from truck to truck and all that stuff, that's the actors doing it.
Wow.
It's incredible. What he was able to kind of get on screen. He knows his way around a sequence. he's very, very good with that. And that's what I really wanted. I wanted that idea of working with Rob and creating these sequences with him. And I think as a movie, it went through a bunch of iterations, and there wasn't a lot of support from the producing team. And, it was a somewhat of a dysfunctional project, which kind of leads to its, lack of being as high quality as it really could be. But I did my job. My job had to do with, getting the camera into the middle of a hurricane. So we were working in practical 100-mile-an-hour winds. We had this special effects guy, and he had these big giant fans, these special fans that blew 100 miles an hour.
Wow.
And so while we were testing these things, I stood in the fans, and the first thing that happened was I couldn't breathe. There's so much water being blown in. There's just even though there's all this wind, there's all this water in the wind, and you cannot breathe. And so, because I wanted to experience what the camera operators are going to experience, so I knew right away, okay, we need to figure out a lot of things here, if they're going to stand here. I have a lot of problem solving here. So just to get a camera into this environment and make it something that's photographable, how to keep the water off the lens so you could actually see, because the actors are going to be in there and they couldn't breathe. And so it's really interesting to kind of deal with those elements. And there was a lot of photographic elements that needed to be solved, and I really liked that. And I liked how Rob worked very closely with me. I would ride in with him every day and ride home with him every day, and I spent a lot of time with him. And he was always very happy with the way things were going. And then when it got to the post process, that film kind of took on a whole new kind of strangeness, and so it was lacking, a real fair shot. So it ended up being probably a little more of a B movie than it should have been. But that was
It was still a hell of a lot of fun, though.
It's a hell of a lot of fun, and the whole Rob Cohen of it all. If it was anyone else, I probably wouldn't have taken 2 looks at that movie. But the whole Rob Cohen aspect of it was enticing.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously everybody's self-isolating at the moment, and you've been remote color grading while quarantining at home, which is quite a new and it must be quite a unique process. Could you sort of tell us about that, and then tell us also, what are you working on now?
Yeah, the color grading I'm doing on 2 different films. We're doing preliminary. You do it as a preliminary step, and I'm doing it on Greyhound, which is the Tom Hanks film. And we've done some grading, and we were going to dive right in when the isolation rule or whatever came into effect. We were 2 days from getting into our last week of color correcting on Greyhound. So a lot of it's been done, but it's not finished. It's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of kind of technical work to do. And so they set me up with some remote grading that I can do from home. And, so Sony is finishing the film, and Playtone, which is Tom's company, has the film. And so I had to kind of get all this cleared through both of those entities, because I talked to the facility, which is Company 3, and asked them about any kind of remote grading that we can do, just so we can get kind of our technical work out of the way. So when we come back into the theater to finish the film, we're doing all the fun stuff. And they described this system they had, and our colorist was into doing it. And so interestingly, I had kind of the toughest time with Playtone. I had to get them to approve it, and of course Tom, was one of the first people to catch coronavirus, and they were very concerned about any kind of putting anybody at risk for any reason at all. And so their knee-jerk answer was, no, you cannot do this, because we don't want anyone working on this movie until this is resolved. And so I spoke to them and explained, here's what they're doing, and they're offering this to us. It's not going to be a paid event. They're offering it to us for free, actually. So, and I said, I'm going to be at home, and nobody's going to come to my house. I can calibrate the equipment that I have to their specs, and I'll be on the phone with their engineers, and they're going to tell me how to do it. And the colorist will be in his isolated place, and it's all going to be completely safe and following the isolation guidelines. And so they finally said, okay, this sounds good. Okay, we'll go ahead and do it. So we did it for a few days, and it was really very effective. And you know, when you're grading a film, so much of what you're doing is having a conversation with the colorist. You're telling him all your reasons and all your goals, and not so much the technical do this, do that. You're actually explaining to him, you know, what your goals are. So we had a chance to finally do that. So I'm really looking forward. The minute this COVID thing ends, we're going to dive right in and finish that. And I'm also doing it on Bill and Ted. I did the third Bill and Ted movie.
Yeah, very cool.
And yeah, so we may have to color the whole thing. So that release date has not been moved. The release date for Greyhound was June 12th. We're definitely not going to make that. So that's Greyhound will probably now come out in 2021. The release date for Bill and Ted is August 21st, and so far they have not moved that date. So, which may force us to finish the color grade completely remote. So,
we'll first time for everything, I guess. Yeah, that's
first time. Yeah, we're all responding to this thing. So, and doing the best we can. And I'm
it's
happy that there are these.
It's the chameleon.
Yep.
You're adapting.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about this stuff is that, you know, here I am, I'm working on, Greyhound, and, everyone who started that movie kind of left. I'm pretty much the sole survivor of that movie. The director's gone, the editor's gone, the original visual effects guy's gone. They're all gone. And it's pretty much me alone. And this guy who's helping me from Sony, so I can go to him and ask him for help. And then I'm personally calling all these people, kind of orchestrating all this, and meet me. And, in order for me to stay involved, I sort of do have to be a problem solver. The minute I become a troublemaker, they're just going to throw me out. Yeah. So I really have to be a value plus kind of guy. And so by getting this all together, I'm kind of bringing value and, giving them a chance at getting a better product on the screen, which I think that movie deserves. You got Tom Hanks in a World War II film. That movie deserves everything you can possibly get, because it's a good film, and it has introduced me to this whole grading thing. So, but if we do have to do the whole thing on Bill and Ted, at least I've done my homework, and my chameleon skin will be in remote mode.
For sure. And one of your upcoming movies, there's a few of them, but one of your upcoming is Shrunk with Joe Johnston.
Yeah. So we're with Joe, and we're with Joe and Larry Franco, who worked on Jurassic. Yeah. So, and that's probably my favorite producer-director combination there. Those guys really help each other. They understand each other. And Larry and I have had conversations, and Larry's the one who finally approved my big scaffold rig. He's the one, and so we get along, and we were having a conversation, and we kind of agreed and said, Shrunk is interesting because there's so much that needs to happen from other departments. These characters are only a quarter of an inch tall, but really small, and which means that so many departments, the art department, visual effects, special effects, me, the producer, Larry and I were saying, all these departments have to work more closely together than probably we've seen on any other movies. And so we really have to kind of, foster a spirit of collaboration and all be working to help Joe make his movie. And I was telling Larry, including production, the producers need to make his movie too. He goes, oh yeah. He goes, we're all here making Joe's movie. He's one of the few generals that are left. And so, that's been fun. We're in prep, and then we got hit with the COVID thing, but Disney allowed us to work for 3 weeks from home. So we had these daily, equivalent to Zoom meetings. They were on Disney's proprietary things, so they were more secure. But we had kind of these virtual bullpen meetings where we did a page turner of the script, and Joe got his pen and paper out and we did some storyboards for us. So we got to see his roughs this time, and which are wonderful, and then we got put on the same hiatus everyone else got put on. So we're kind of waiting, and the minute we get the green light, we're gonna go back and so because we're well into it, and it's gonna be nice. It's a fun piece. He likes the script's in pretty good shape. So
Rick Moranis coming back.
Rick is coming back, and for a while he wasn't. The first version of the script that I read, the Rick Moranis story was huge, figured enormous into it, the relationship, because the kids have grown up and now they have kids, and those are the kids that get lost, and so now they've the story of between Rick and his son, who got lost in the first film, need to kind of work together, and there's a past, and there's a whole story around that, and then we heard that Rick didn't want to do it. Now it's like, uh-oh. now what do we do? And then somehow, 3 weeks passed, and I guess Joe had talked to Rick and was able to convince him to do it, and so now he's all in and he's going to do it, and which is great, because that was a big concern when he was, feeling like he didn't want to do it. I think he's been kind of half in retirement, and he's more or less coming out of retirement to do it. Yeah.
But that's going to be an exciting one to see. I mean, it's a brilliant combination of talent working on that, and it's going to be great to see yourself and Joe working on another project.
Yeah, I'm excited about it for sure. It's interesting when you work with him. His films are all complicated. There's a high degree of difficulty, and when we started Jurassic 3, I mean, was it 2 days before shooting? We had a little conversation with Spielberg, and Spielberg told us both. He said, these movies, the Jurassic movies, are really hard to make. We're like, okay, thanks.
Thank you.
2 days before we start, yeah, okay, yeah. and that has progressed into all the movies I've made with Joe. They're all difficult. Hidalgo, Wolfman, Lumen. The Captain America was incredibly complex, and all of his movies are difficult. So you just when you think you've gotten through a tough sequence, you're going to be able to come up for air. Nope, there's an even more complicated sequence you're starting tomorrow, and then a more complicated sequence after that. I mean, it's really crazy, and so, but that's the way you get something meaningful on the screen. He challenges himself. He challenges the people around him. He really wants people to rise to the occasion and create a screen moment that is memorable, and that's how you do it. And that's how the good guys work. That's how Spielberg works. That's how the really good directors will challenge you. And it in some respects, it's like the opposite of fun. It's like incredibly hard work, but it's still very enjoyable. So it's a funny thing.
And seeing the end result, of course, is what it's all for. It all pays off in the end.
Sure.
Shelly, it's been amazing to speak with you. Thank you so much for this. I got to ask, where can people find your work online? You've got the ShellyJohnsonAAC.com, and then your Instagram, which is incredibly insightful. Do you recommend people follow you there?
Yeah. So my Instagram, I think, is Shelly Johnson ASC, and then ShellyJohnsonAAC.com is my blog, which has a lot of war stories. So there's in terms of there's some Jurassic stories on there. There's Wolfman stories, Captain America stories. They go back into some of the TV days. It's kind of I've been kind of chronicling all the stories I have in my head. So those are the two main things. And then this year, there's whatever. Well, this year or two, there's going to be multiple movies per year coming out that I've done. So they're all going to be hitting the streets and then hitting, home video at some point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you again, Shelly. It's been really great to speak with you. And thank you for sharing such incredible stories about your time on Jurassic and many other movies. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Jack. Have a good one.
Yeah,
Bye.
you too. Goodbye.